Great, thanks a lot, Rufio, and thanks to the Secretariat for today's event. It's the last TCOP in this year. So great to have so many TCOP members and also members from other departments of Ministry of Finance participating and partners. I mean, this really shows how important this topic is of asset management. It's a new emerging topic. It's beyond the classical topics we discuss in TCOP. And it is indeed a growing area of interest because it impacts not only service delivery of essential economic infrastructure and public services, but it also impacts public finances, countries' balance sheets. And it goes well beyond the compliance aspects, which is usually the first initial driver of asset registries and inspections. And as we discussed during the last plenary, in PEMPA plenary, ensuring fiscal and climate sustainability in the post-COVID recovery is indeed a top priority for many ministries of finance across the world, as public debt balloons and climate disasters loom. This requires a holistic approach, looking beyond the budgets and the flows, looking also at the balance sheets and leveraging assets where we can, as they're often underutilized or undervalued with very dated book entry values, and we'll see that today. Governments know what they owe, they don't always know what they own and how much it's worth. And so how to generate more revenues and mitigate fiscal risks, for example, by renting out underutilized real estate assets or land, or by controlling the viability gap financing in PPPs, is really important to have a strong asset management system and policy in place. Public asset management is also essential to support countries' climate adaptation and mitigation efforts, which we discussed a bit at the last COP, and which was certainly discussed in great details at the COP26. And the stock of existing infrastructure assets is increasingly exposed to climate risks, extreme weather events, for instance, to physical risks, such as flooding, roads being washed away. But it's also increasingly exposed to transition risks as countries really adopt their climate strategies, going towards a carbon neutral economic model. Some assets which are very carbon intensive may become redundant and stranded. And so how to really proactively address that is important. And so that's really the primary concern of the Ministries of Finance and Treasuries. And so that's why we're really happy to be able to discuss that today with you, because it goes beyond the remit of the Ministry of Environment. And treasuries in many countries have important asset management responsibilities, not only in terms of accounting and valuation as they move towards accrual accounting, but also in terms of financial reporting and generating the government balance sheet, but also in terms of optimizing value, revenues, and cash management for these assets. And we have a great set of speakers to actually discuss that today, and I really would like to thank them for their active participation. I'll present them right after, but we'll have a very rich session, which also means that we may be a bit pressed for time because we cannot really do justice to this theme in 2.5 hours. So for us, it's really the beginning of a conversation, and we can pursue this conversation in subsequent events, but also leveraging the new additional activities that are launched under PEMNA 2, such as the advisory services or virtual study tours, face-to-face when that becomes possible, but also the research projects. So if there's more interest from the PEMNA member in this topic, really happy to pursue that. Today's webinar will be composed of 2 sessions, following by the closing remarks by Dr. Ho, head of the PEMNA Secretariat. And so after the group picture, which Rufio just mentioned, we'll start with an overview session by Dr. Henning, which will provide us with an international perspective on infrastructure asset management, valuation and registries, followed by a 20-minute Q&A. So please do prepare your questions. Let's really take advantage of Dr. Henning's presence today. He has a lot of experience across the world. And you can post your questions in the chat and also ask them in the Q&A session. The second session will focus on country experiences, challenges and opportunity, as is traditionally the case in our TCOP knowledge exchanges. And they also would like to thank the many countries who have volunteered to present, including Korea, the Philippines, Malaysia, as well as country updates from Cambodia and Timor-Leste on where they stand in their asset management reform. So we have 5 speakers who will be presenting, and so I'll ask each speaker to stick. Apart from the overview session, which is a bit more comprehensive, but I'll ask all country presentations to stick to the 15 minutes which have been allocated, and for the country updates 10 minutes, so that we do have time for discussions, as we'll need a strict time management to be able to make it. And I signal to the speakers whenever they have 5 minutes left, the 5 fingers, and when they have 1 minute left, so that we can move to the questions thereafter. So without further ado, let me hand over to Rufio for the group photo, and then let's hear from Dr. Henning for the overview session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. Just want to do a check that you can see my presentation and my sound comes through clear. All good?
Very well.
Thank you. This is certainly a pleasure for me to be presenting to you today fixed infrastructure asset management. My name is Dr. Theuns Henning, and I work for the University of Auckland, and I'm also a short-term consultant for the World Bank. I would like to start by just a reminder for all of us what the importance of fixed assets are for our society. And I think this is old news for all of you, but it is the backbone of our economic growth. It is certainly very important in the well-being of our communities. And then, as you know yourself, it's also a very strong economic stimulant or tool for governments to determine the spending and the activity around the economy. So if they want to stimulate the economy, they raise investment into infrastructure, which creates jobs and people spending more money. Therefore, the effective management of infrastructure has got significant cost implication for the economy and then also for the countries. In my overview, I just want to make clear that there's really 2 perspectives to fixed assets or fixed infrastructure. The perspective seen by engineers, and then obviously the perspective that's seen by the accounting side of things. Now, I do realize that maybe my entire audience today comes from a more accounting perspective, but what I would like to do is almost to build that bridge between the engineering thinking and the accounting thinking, because both are very important when we do manage our fixed infrastructure. Now, what I would like to start with is some of the official definitions of what fixed asset management are about. There are 2 guidelines that's internationally being the most widely used. The first one is the International Infrastructure Management Manual that came out of New Zealand and Australia. And the second one there is the ISO 55000 series that comes out of the UK. So indicated there in red are the important key points to this definition. We see that the IIMM manual really emphasized the required level of service from our infrastructure in the most cost-effective manner. So it's not really about the asset itself, but the service that the assets perform to our communities. In the ISO 55000 series, there's emphasis on the coordination of activities and making sure that organizations realize the value from the infrastructure, which is, of course, for all of the countries here present, very important. When we look at the asset management benefits or the benefits that the asset management process bring to the table, international literature suggests that we can expect between a 20 to 25% efficiency gain. Now, that efficiency gain consists of 2 parts. The part in blue, which is perhaps a better performance of our infrastructure for similar investment levels. The second one in orange is that you maintain a similar condition, but at a cheaper cost. So the combination of those two certainly give us an efficiency gain of 20 to 25%. The next one there in the lighter blue is also a well-maintained infrastructure. Grouping will also be more resilient. We know that as our infrastructure gets older and deteriorated, it becomes more vulnerable to impacts from natural hazards. The last one there is also very important, and that is that through a well-maintained infrastructure group, we are going to improve on our customer satisfaction. So I've listed there on the right-hand side really the benefits being effectiveness, efficiency, sustainability in the long term, resilience, and then also adaptation and the ability to adapt to changing technology, changing climate, and also needs. This figure comes from the IBM business specialist, and what it shows us is that journey of adopting good practice in fixed asset management. On the top, you see that it starts off with innocence, awareness, understanding, competence, and then ending up in excellence. So what we try to do, and it refers there to the pendulum that swings in the attitude from a cost focus on infrastructure more towards the value focus of infrastructure. So what we see as our infrastructure asset management competencies and practices improve over time, we're going to reduce the spend on maintenance while we increase the value and the performance of our infrastructure. And you can see there the various steps in those dots there, going from repair things as good as it was before or replace like for like, having a very reactive process, and way then over to this size where we start making optimized decisions and really focus on our life cycle and reliability in the long term. So this is a very good illustration of that journey. Now, I also want to emphasize the timeline that you can see there at the bottom. Good asset management practices cannot be picked up in one day or 1 year, and we're going to hear some very interesting case studies today. But that journey takes some time, and the time estimates between 1 to 5 years, I think, is very relevant and applicable for this implementation. When we look at the guiding principles of asset management systems, I've mentioned there the 4 ones that perhaps is most important. The first one is preservation first, and what we've got to remember, there's a tremendous pressure, and we're going to talk about that, for the expansion of our infrastructure, more roads, more water, more buildings. But what we also got to remember is to protect the current investment we already have. So preserve what we have first before we start looking at these other things. It's about the entire infrastructure system, not individual projects, and that's perhaps more something for engineers to take note of. Through our processes, we want to maximize the return on our investment. And that return on investment may mean different things for different people. It could be the condition that we maintain, the level of service that we provide, or the level of risk that we obviously want to keep to a minimum for every currency amount that we invest in that infrastructure. Lastly, we will want to make things sustainable, and sustainable in the global sense of our environment, but also sustainable in the time domain, and making sure that our children and our children's children is going to have the benefit of the resources that we are currently using. So those few slides gave you a little bit of a glimpse of the benefits of asset management, and we certainly can go back to that in question time. What I would like to do now is take you through a quick journey through what the asset management system all involves. And the first one there is really what we try to achieve with fixed asset management. And this is really about finding a good balance between the different needs on our infrastructure. We have got a lot of changes in demographic and urbanization and population growth. People building new neighborhoods in certain parts of the city. We need to understand the specific needs of our customers, and our customers could be residential private citizens, or it could be businesses, or it could be government organizations. Then we also have to maintain our aging infrastructure, and this is something that countries right around the world are struggling with. I think most of the countries had quite a significant infrastructure growth following the Second World War, and many of that infrastructure is now getting to an old age where we've got to start thinking about replacing them. And then lastly, we also have got this increasing natural disasters and assets that's impacting on our infrastructure. So that is something we also have to allow for. In these color arrows, and just remember, the purple one suggests more of an accounting view of life, whereas the blue one, the engineering view of life. We see there the differences in these approaches. So for example, using growth and demand, from an engineering perspective, I want to build more stuff, and I want to make sure that I invest in infrastructure provision. The accountants will also ask, but what is that going to mean to our economy, and what's that going to mean to our economic growth? So there's certainly a fixed asset consideration there, but also the financial consideration. We want to make sure that we maintain our infrastructure with proactive investment, and therefore do the savings in maintenance. And we want to also invest in the resilience of our infrastructure to reduce the losses. And I will come back to some of these in later slides. Now, when we start talking about the investment side of things, the engineer is most concerned about what's available for me to use and build stuff and renew it. Whereas from an accounting perspective, you really need to work out carefully what your financial strategy is going to be in terms of maybe having to borrow money or call on bonds in order to afford some of these infrastructure investments. Now, when we look at the ISO 55000 structures, I think this explains the entire process quite well. So we've got these different blocks. Now, the bottom one is about your infrastructure, your asset management resources, including your physical infrastructure, the funding that you've got available, and the work that you can complete. So that's your workforce, your contractors, and your engineers. The next level up are all of those asset management enablers. So those are the type of things that makes it possible to do asset management, including people, processes, and technology. And the next one then is from those two bottom processes, we then end up with the asset management service levels that we produce. And there we got a balance between performance, cost, and risk. And I'll come back to that in a later point. And then also just note all of these planning processes ultimately will result in the asset outcomes that we deliver to our communities. Now, when we look at the components in a little bit more detail, we see those words again, level of service. So that's how good our assets perform their functions. The future demand in terms of population growth and demographic changes, the risk and the resilience aspect. So we've got all of these two processes resting on our asset data, our asset inventory, or our asset register. The first block there illustrates the lifecycle management approach, and you can see a number of analysis we need to do to understand the cost for operations, maintenance, renewals, and even new capital, and then sometimes disposal of assets. We want to optimize the entire system so that we minimize the cost and maximize that return on investment. From a financial perspective, we obviously have got the expenditure stream. So what does it cost to operate and maintain, renew, and capital investment? and then on the flip side of the coin, the revenue, the fees and the charges and the tariffs that we can get, our loans, grants and fundings and bonds that will enable us to fund those initiatives that we employ in our asset management. Now, again, on the left-hand side, we see some of the benefits that I may have mentioned before, but one thing I would like to just re-emphasize here is what Fabian has mentioned earlier, that we've got to do a proper valuation of our assets so that we make sure that our government balance sheet is up to date and is as accurate as we can get it for the obvious reasons. What I would like to do in the next few slides, I'm just going to quickly, sorry, I need to flip that side. What I would like to do is just go through each one of these blocks in a slide or two, starting with our planning process on provision for demand. So those things include population changes. From an engineering perspective, what's my current capacity of the infrastructure and what's going to be the future changes? From an accounting perspective, we want to also know what's my revenue growth, what are the financial financing options that I have, and what sort of added value are we going to get by increasing the capacity of our infrastructure. And there we have to really focus hard to make sure we target the outcomes that we want to target. For example, if we struggle with congestion, building more roads may not solve your problem, and your investment and return on investment may be better going to more public transport options. At the same vein, we want to forecast the future changes and needs according to that, which also then involves the financial forecasting. From that, we get our infrastructure gap and also our financing strategy in order to afford for that growth or to allow for the growth. So we get the investment needs, and then on the accounting side, look at the economy growth, but also perhaps the opportunities for creating new markets. The next block I would like to just briefly touch on is lifecycle management. And this is an important one to realize from an accounting perspective, but the engineers have to live and breathe this. And the punchline there is good infrastructure costs less. What we have in this picture is typical infrastructure deterioration over time, from excellent on the top to the failed or very poor here at the bottom. And in almost all the infrastructure that we have, there's a rule of thumb that says that for 2/3 of that infrastructure life, you are sacrificing between 20 to 30% of the overall condition or service levels. And then for the remaining third, that condition deteriorates very fast. So what that means that the smart investment is really to try and keep that infrastructure either in that yellow or green bit of this graph. So keeping everything in a relatively good condition, and don't let it decay to this area where you have to pay a lot extra to rehabilitate or even sometimes to rebuild. Now that oversimplifies the problem, and I do recognize that, because there's other drivers that we have to take account when we decide the level of service we want to maintain. Our customer needs and what they require. There are health and safety aspects involved. For example, with drinking water, there's drinking water standards that we have to maintain. And then we also got the questions around risk and resilience. And again, there's trade-offs between what we invest on our infrastructure, fixed assets, versus what we use and invest on our fiscal side in terms of insurance and making sure that we can cope with disasters. So it's a little bit of a complex analysis, but I think the overall rule stands. Level of service, and I guess the best way to explain level of service is just to go through some examples of the level of service aspects that we look at. So typically we look at accessibility, access for people to basic infrastructure services such as clean water, access to markets, access to schools and hospitals. The next one is about the quantity or the quality. So this is really how well that infrastructure provides for our needs. Now that could be in terms of protecting us against natural hazards, or that we've got a good sense when we use our infrastructure. Our water tastes nice, it smells nice, and also when we drive on our roads, we get a pleasant experience. Then there's the aspects around reliability and responsiveness, our resilience aspects. And then lastly, I have talked about sustainability, which is all about our environment and the future generations having the same access to the resources that we had. In the next few slides, I am going to emphasize a little bit the aspects around resilience. It is, again, something Fabian has mentioned as being important. And what I'm trying to illustrate with this figure that I got from Greg Felder is how asset management, the management of disaster-related contingency and liabilities and risk management relates. Now, obviously, my focus being on the fixed asset management, what we see there is that good assets will have a lower cost of risk sharing, but there's also another aspect that perhaps from a Treasury perspective you can keep in mind is with countries that are following good asset management practices, the lending and donor negotiations become so much easier because there's already a system in place to make sure that investment goes into the right places. The intercept between the risk management and asset management is, of course, having the ability to prioritize our resilience improvement works into where it matters most. And then I think the area that you may be far more familiar with is understanding the financial liabilities and things and risk management, knowing the balance points between investing in the resilience versus accepting the risk as it is versus buying insurance to cover some of those natural hazard risks. So all of these are very closely related, but I just want to keep on emphasizing that the fixed asset management process is a very good vehicle for managing resilience as part of our asset management process. Now, the way I would like to illustrate that is give you an overview of the entire asset management process. Now, this figure comes out of some of the earlier versions of the IIMM manual. And you see some of the words that I have been using here already, your asset management enablers, your people, processes, and technologies, your life cycle strategies, and then also the understanding of my data and my information management side of things. What I have done with each one of these blocks was looking at how it can contribute in the resilience cycle. Now that resilience cycle is preparing for a disaster or prior to a disaster, during an event and after an event. And we can see that, yes, asset management predominantly helps in our disaster preparation side of things and to improve our resilience. But certainly also in some of the processes that I will show in the following slide, we can also do a lot in asset management during an event and then also following an event in the rebuild and reconstruction planning. So talking about that, and I would like to use the example of climate resilience or climate adaptation. Now, many countries already have got a very good understanding of the climate risk and all natural hazard risk for that matter. Also may have resilient improvements and climate adaptation strategies in place, and then also have quite a few business processes to manage some of these events. And I think some of the country names that I have seen today is just astronomical in terms of where you guys are at with things like disaster and response planning, and some of your investment into specific resilience initiative is something to admire. What I would like to advocate, though, is that we can use the fixed asset management process also to help us with that whole resilience cycle, because that provides data, the analysis capability, and then the understanding things like asset criticality and vulnerability areas, geospatial maps, and all of those things that can help each one of these individual items that's part of the resilience cycle. So just again, we can find a lot of benefits of the asset management process in the resilience cycle. Through the World Bank, I have been involved with a number of projects that look at mainstreaming climate adaptation into the asset management process. A lot of the work was, of course, focused on the Pacific Islands, but I did similar work in South Africa and in the Philippines of late. So many countries are starting to do that. Okay, now as Fabian has promised, we are going to focus a little bit on depreciation and valuation. And what I would like to start off with is just the functional areas within infrastructure asset management. Starting at the top, and this is perhaps where our Treasury departments and ministries becomes relevant, is there are different drivers that make sure that asset management processes and practices are adopted throughout the government sector. And these include things like legislative processes, policies, and we're going to get back to some of those. But really, in terms of making asset management important and making it happen on the ground, is perhaps a central role of government. I'm then going to jump to the bottom, and that's a foundation of fixed asset management, and it's all about my knowledge on my assets that relies on data and information and condition of my infrastructure. We then go into the analysis processes, and there's basically two of them. There's the decision-making side of things, and I think that I gave you some examples on that. And then in life cycle management, we get the life cycle cost analysis, again, something that mostly engineers are interested in. But from an accounting perspective, depreciation, valuation important, and then performance management. The last block here refers to the asset delivery. So that's everything that happens once you have planned your investment, and that is how you're going to roll it out on the network, whether it's using a private contractor or in-house resources to do it. So let's look a little bit closer at the asset valuation in itself, and I've listed these two guidelines that comes to mind. First of all, the handbook for accounting in public sector, and then the second one there is from IPWA, that's in Australia and New Zealand. And really, the crux behind valuation, as you well know yourself, is really making sure that the organization stays on top of the financial liabilities for infrastructure. Again, the danger there is often that we construct and build a whole lot of new infrastructure and maybe neglecting the investment in maintaining our existing infrastructure. And this is what the valuation process try and prevent. It looks at the whole of life cost, maintaining the reliable asset data to support this decision process. So asset inventory of registry and asset valuation goes hand in hand. So I think, although from a Treasury's perspective, you may be more interested in the financial side of things, without the base data of your infrastructure, that's going to be very difficult. So that also needs a focus. Making sure that we've got the agreed level of service and optimizing our revenues and the cost of our public assets, and then again, focusing on the long-term sustainability behind this. So fixed asset management practices just aligns very well with financial management. And you can, listen, this is not rocket science. I think in your own lives, the way that you look after your own belongings, your house or your car, follows these principles. We want to make sure that we look after them in a sufficient manner. Again, just showing the valuation and depreciation curve. And this may be old news to you, but I would like to highlight some differences in the engineering view of the world and the accounting world. Again, we've got an infrastructure that starts off new and in a very good condition and deteriorates over time to a very poor condition. Now, the easiest way that we do things is we do a straight line depreciation. So we make an estimate of how long it's going to last, and then we draw a straight line to that. And there's nothing wrong with straight line depreciation. But I think if you remember that condition curve that I gave you earlier, it's not always a straight line. So that is perhaps something to think about. Some engineers like to use the actual deterioration curve in the evaluation process. Now, many of these things I'm going to mention here, there's no right or wrong answer in the way it should be done. I think what you have to be more focused on is to make sure that your depreciation and valuation rules are clearly defined and that it is consistently applied across the different infrastructure sectors, because you want to stay on top of the trend in your overall balance sheet on a governmental level. The moment you start that seeing reduce, you know you're not investing enough in your infrastructure. So some of the differences is in the way that we look at our starting point or maybe our replacement value. From an accounting perspective, we most of the times look at a capitalized value. So that's the value when we initiate or build or create the infrastructure. But in most cases, the actual replacement value is far greater than that capitalized value. So that's just something maybe to keep in mind, because ultimately, things will become more expensive, and also we don't always replace like for like. I may have had a certain pipe of a diameter there, and if it gets old and I replace it, I may replace it with a bigger pipe or a larger pipe, and we have to keep those things in mind when we do valuations. There's also the discussions around what a standard life is, a financial standard life, which is assumed value, whereas with the fixed assets practice lives, we can do a lot of things to infrastructure to make it last longer. And therefore, our assumed end of life is not necessarily a stationary point. So that's perhaps something else where your rule set's got to be quite clear on. Now, in terms of what the valuation process gives you, so I've listed just 4 points there. We have to have the common measure and units of standards, and as I say, practices. We got to make sure that we understand the useful life considerations and how we're going to calculate the remaining useful life in that, and then make sure that our replacement cost is calculated in a sensible manner.
So just a quick note, we're very short in time, so if you could please wrap it up in the next 2 minutes, so we can then come back to some of these points in the discussion.
I will speed up. We're getting to the easier bit now. This is quite an important concept if you want to adopt asset management across governmental level, and that is the asset data information, capturing the data that you create in the beginning and then using it throughout the life cycle of our infrastructure. The next one is take an example, and we're perhaps going to get back to this. This one comes out of the Philippines, where they've created a national asset registry. And what we have shown there is the different functionalities of the asset registry and which one of those in purple are most relevant or perhaps of interest for a Treasury department. Just looking at what you can do to encourage asset management best practice adoption. I have looked at 3 countries and they had a similar story. So create an infrastructure, a fixed asset management unit within Treasury. That is where New Zealand has started. We now have a Minister of Infrastructure, and that's the same person that's also the Minister of Finance. We also have a commission that's advising the government on the infrastructure decisions. South Africa has done the same. They also created a unit within Treasury to drive asset management in local government. And you're going to hear shortly about what the Philippines has done in a similar manner. Some of the mechanisms you can use to achieve that is through legislation. So we've got the Local Government Act in New Zealand that forces public entities to have an asset management plan and to ensure they maintain their asset lives and depreciation value. That could also be achieved through national policies like has been done in the Philippines, or if you've got a central funding application process, you can make it part of your requirements to have asset management in place. And then in some countries, lead agencies put a little bit of peer pressure on the others to perform. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide, although it's very important then to have a balance in asset management practice adoption between technology, having the right business processes and people in place. So there's my key messages. Those first 2 is really about appreciating the value of our infrastructure. Establish the best practice needs to be driven from central government with the right incentives to make sure that happens, and then to prevent the undervaluation of our infrastructure, because that is going to catch up with you in the future. Data registers or central data management systems, very important. And then also don't forget about climate change and natural hazards being a very important part to incorporate with our public asset management process. Thank you, Fabian. So that's my presentation.
Well, thanks a lot, Theuns. And indeed, that's congratulations for covering so much front in so little time. It's indeed a very rich presentation, which really shows the many dimensions of asset management. But it's great to hear a bit from the members, their views, their questions. It's indeed a new area which covers many objectives. It's across the public sector. And as we see, Ministry of Finance and Treasuries really have a critical role to play. So, I mean, let's utilize this opportunity of having Dr. Henning here, who has really worked on the life cycle of asset management as well, and across countries, to maybe go into more details on some of these issues. So who wants to go first? Who has a question? Either you can put it in the chat, or you can just raise your hand. Or so I don't know if the presentation was so crystal clear that there are no questions, or if it's just a lot of information to digest in little time. That's impacted hard on me. So,
yeah, I just want to mention there is a pre-recording of my presentation that will also be made available. And I took a little bit more time in explaining every slide. So you are welcome to go back to those in your own time.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot.
Excuse me.
Yes. Please, great.
Really, I didn't find the what called the raise hand here, so I have thought. Mr. Henning, from your experience from the New Zealand perspective, how long that this, we call it as a asset management that we perceive to achieve from the start until now, how long does it take? I think I'm more concerned on the change management activities that you've done.
Yes. Thank you very much. That's a very good question, but also quite a difficult question to answer, because it's almost like you asked me how long a piece of string is. I have indicated that at a minimum, you're looking at a period between up to 5 years for that change management process and transition really to embed. I also don't think there will ever be a stage where you say, now I have achieved asset management as it should be done, and I can relax. I don't have to do it anymore. New Zealand has been doing this for over 20 years now, when our local government has come into act. And every year we try to improve on our processes. The questions we try to answer changes, our financial situation changes. So there's technology improvements that happens with data collection and analytics. So it's a journey, and there's no end destination. But throughout this journey, I think there's so many benefits that you can pick up for a country that certainly it's well worthwhile to embark on that.
Thank you.
Absolutely, very relevant question. Colleagues, and any further questions based on your perspective and your experience in dealing with asset management, asset valuation? I guess that unlike financial assets, where treasuries really have a core responsibility, for fixed assets, it's indeed a shared responsibility, and so it's very fragmented across levels of government and agencies, right? So this question of incentives is also important. So how to incentivize agencies to really optimize the value and the revenue from their assets, if it's just going to the common pot. And that would be my question to you, Dr. Henning.
Yes, I would like to answer that. And Fabian, although we are predominantly talking to people from Treasury, when you get to your line agencies, which may be a Ministry of Works or a water provision organization, what we often get also is that the accountancy side of the organization and the engineering side don't do an integrated planning process, and fixed asset management processes forces them to work together. And that's why we often need to establish an infrastructure unit or an infrastructure team at national level, but then also at departmental or ministry level. Have a group of people that includes engineers, accountants, sociologists, climate specialists. So bring them together to do an integrated planning process and break down those silos, because you cannot work on the engineering side without understanding the financial consequences. And likewise, you need to also have taking account of the fixed assets issues when you do your financial strategies.
Thanks a lot. I see also that Ewan from VST Vietnam raised her hand. If you can please come in. Okay, so apparently
we've got a good question there in the chat box. That is to do with the valuation of assets. For assets that we haven't got information on, how can we come up with acceptable value and bring it into the books? A very good question. Again, I think what you need to realize is that you're gonna have this capability and capacity growth over time. So when you start off with, you will start with the information and the data that you have, and there may be a little bit of your confidence level around that may not be so great. As a first point in that process that you need to focus on is to go and collect the data that's really important and that is vital for your decision processes. And as the new data then comes in, you start refining your valuation and your depreciation process closer, and then have a smaller level of confidence around your valuation processes.
No, absolutely. There's no entry balance which is right on day one, right? So
correct. Yeah, it is like they say, when's the best time to start saving? Well, that's 10 years ago. But if you haven't done it 10 years ago, today is the second best time to start.
exactly. Are there any other questions from members? Sorry, I don't see the hands. If you don't find the hand button, don't worry, just come in. Huyen, I see you reconnected. Huyen Van Tan from VST, you had your hand open. Do you have a question? Okay, else I would have a further question to you, Dr. Henning, in terms of the climate risk screening. I think you had a great slide that really showed the importance of that. And I think that's very timely as we really see the severity and intensity of extreme weather events is increasing. It induces huge damages and losses, and the Treasury gets the bill. So, okay, so I see that Thuyen is trying to come in, so maybe I'll let her ask her question first.
Anh Nam có nghe được em nói không ạ? Em Hiền ạ.
We can hear you now.
Dạ vâng, em đang sử dụng. Vâng.
Thuyen?
Đúng ngôn ngữ à?
Okay, I don't know if you can answer questions in Vietnamese as well, Theuns.
Đây anh nghe được chưa ạ?
Sorry, Thuyen, you're not muted. Do you have a question to us, or is it just unmuted mic? Unless I'll need to ask the host to mute. Okay, thanks. Okay, sorry for that.
Okay, Fabian, I will answer your question. That is just to do with understanding your resilience and natural hazard risk on your infrastructure. It's vitally important because I think many countries is in a situation that they cannot afford climate adaptation and adapting to things. So we got to balance investing into increasing the resilience of our infrastructure, into investing into the resilience of our communities through preparation and disaster management programs, have the financial instruments in place to either cover a risk of disaster events that we cannot allow for. So all of those things can only be done by a thorough understanding of your risk profile. And I think if you talk to people, especially in the insurance business, they will tell you how important it is to have a good understanding of your risk profile. Interesting thing I have picked up in Australia as an example is the Institute for Insurance in Australia has got a new motto to make Australia insurable. So they are looking at methods of getting asset management applied and adopted within government sectors to help them managing the risk even on that side. And they sometimes invest in projects that will promote the implementation of asset management. So that just tells you how important that holistic approach is.
No, thanks a lot indeed, and that's also something of direct interest to treasuries and ministry of finance, right? Because if you don't have your valuation and your risk profile right, chances are you pay a much higher premium for your insurance or get insufficient coverage. So there's a direct financial consequence to that.
Exactly.
So Huyen had issues with the audio, so she put the question in the chat. So she's asking about the link between asset management systems and accounting systems. And a second question on how to evaluate the assets. And I think we'll have a couple of country presentations on that, but these are indeed two very relevant questions for treasuries, right? So how to have a direct link and not always run after fragmented databases and having disconnected data. And also how to make sure that we have a proper evaluation. Thank you.
That is also a very good question and something that I have grappled with for a number of years. because you get the question of, should I have two systems? Should I have one system that can do everything, and all of those questions? But some principles that I would like to leave you with. Number one is having one point for all your information and data is very important. One single truth. So manage all your information and data in one place. You may have different analysis systems. So for example, the engineering asset management systems performs a certain task, and they've got very good systems to do that. And the same way, you've got accounting systems that performs accounting very well. So I don't say get a system that can do both, but what I do say is integrate the data, that both use the same data, and then make sure that between the software systems, you've got business processes to link accounting with the fixed asset management process. And what helps tremendously, again, I'm sorry that I labor this point, but having a dedicated infrastructure asset management team that consists of engineers and accountants and all of the different parties in one team, then also facilitate that business process integration. Now, the second part of the question is how to evaluate the assets. I'm not too sure exactly what evaluation you are referring to, whether you're referring to the condition data collection where we evaluate the condition, or where you actually talk about the valuation of assets. Now, most times, my preference certainly is for the asset management processes to feed into the valuation process that sits on an accounting side of things. So let the engineers help you a little bit with a more detailed estimate of your expected lives and your replacement costs. So get that information from the engineering system. But in terms of evaluation, I think that's traditionally the best placed within an accounting system. Did that answer your question, Ma'am?
No, thank you very much, Dr. Henning. And indeed, I guess that will be a recurring question, and we'll also hear a bit from the country cases on how to go about the valuation. You know, what standards, IPSAS standards, the different valuation methods, but also having a regular re-evaluation of the financial value of your assets. But that's a very good segue, I guess, to the second part. On the country cases. So with that, let me thank you very much, Dr. Henning. And indeed, there will be an audio recording with more time, and we'll also be happy to take follow-on questions thereafter. But for now, let us move into session 2, the country case. Let me then now hand over to the Philippines, to Ms. Maria Erica Reyes, who is Chief Treasury Operations 1 at the Philippines Treasury, and she'll share the Philippine asset management reform experience, starting with the development of an integrated asset registry, but then followed by a national policy and interministerial coordination mechanism, which Dr. Henning mentioned as well. And I think really what's interesting in the Philippine experience is this holistic and integrated approach to this national reform. So over to you, Ms. Reyes. Looking forward to a presentation. It will then be followed by Malaysia, and then we'll have a Q&A. Thank you.
Hello, good morning. I'm Erica Reyes from the Bureau of the Treasury of the Philippines, and I'm here to present our National Asset Registry System.
Thanks a lot. If there's a way to make it full screen, maybe that will be a bit easier.
I'm sorry.
If there's a way to make the presentation full screen.
Just a moment, please.
Sure.
Okay. Is that okay? Okay.
Perfect, thank you.
So on this slide is the timeline of the development of the National Asset Registry System. The NARS aims to create and maintain an inventory of the non-financial assets of the national government. The NARS initiative started with the pilot agencies identified by the National Economic and Development Authority of the Philippines as having strategically important assets, which are vital to the country's economic growth. This initiative was part of a technical assistance for the Interagency Committee on Government Property Insurance, and was officially launched in November of 2018. In 2018 to 2019, the World Bank and PricewaterhouseCoopers were engaged in a technical consultancy for the initial setup of the conduct of the registry. The initial findings of the NARS formed the recommendation to undertake a national indemnity insurance program and to further the management of the national government assets and establish a government asset management endeavor. In 2020, a joint memorandum circular between the Department of Finance, the Department of Budget and Management, and the National Economic Development Authority was signed, establishing the Philippine Government Asset Management Policy with the Department of Budget and Management as the lead agency, and formalizing the maintenance of the system, or the registry system, with the Bureau of the Treasury. Currently, the NARS Excel template is being upgraded to a web-based portal, which is internally developed by the Bureau of the Treasury, and this project aims to improve the data collection and management of the NARS. On our screen is the joint memorandum circular, which was signed on September 2020, and this lays the groundwork for the government-wide asset management policy of the Philippines. So what is NARS? We define NARS as the comprehensive inventory of the asset of the national government. These assets are strategically important assets of the government identified to be integral in the performance of the agency's mandate. These assets may include land, buildings, hospitals, school buildings, road, bridges, water systems, power plants, and other infrastructures owned, used, and managed by the national government. On your screen is the information that can be found on the registry. The registry is an extensive inventory of assets that includes details on the general, legal, location, financial, insurance, and technical aspects of the assets. The first 5 types of information are common to all types of assets, while the technical description of the asset changes depending on the asset type. So the Bureau of the Treasury conducts seminars and webinars to introduce the system to the user agencies and run the does run through the user brief the users of the data or information that is gathered by the system. The data information gathered through NARS may be used for insurance, risk profiling, and risk management, and the improvement of the government asset management policy. From the agencies handling the initial assets identified on this slide, we are now rolling out to include other agencies managing other vital infrastructures like airports, seaports, power plants, and transmission lines. So let me just show you how the data in the registry can be used to locate the physical assets of the government. So this is one of the hospital compounds of the Health Department of the Philippines, and the facilities are tagged on a per building basis. To date, NARS have collected the following data from different agencies. So from the 5 pilot agencies, we have added 10 other government agencies. we require these agencies to provide yearly update to account for acquisitions, disposals, and decommissioning of assets. So that's it for the National Asset Registry System of the Philippines. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very efficient presentation. I think you summarized a very big reform in very little time. That's great. And indeed, what I note from the Philippine experience is really this national approach to the reform. You know, in many countries, it's either bottom up at local government level, or it's a partial reform focusing only on the accounting or only on the maintenance aspect. So there you try to cover everything. And it's holistic. It covers the policy. There's a national policy on the asset management reform. There's also an institutional coordination that has been set up, and you're piloting with the biggest ministries, which have really the large assets, so infrastructure, but also which offer critical services such as health and education. And that's particularly relevant for the disaster risk approach and resilience you're taking. But maybe if there are follow-up questions, maybe put them in the chat. What I would like to suggest, since we have quite a few presentations still to go, is to really post your questions in the chat so that the presenters can provide additional information and responses in the chat while we go through the presentations. But so without further ado, let me hand it over to Ms. Noyati Binti Ahmad, Director for Accrual Accounting Team at the Malaysian Accountant General's Department. The presentation will talk about asset recognition and valuation notably, and based on IPSAS 17, how it's used for modified accrual accounting and the opening balance, how assets are registered as part of the Malaysian FMIS, and that's a very important point. We had quite a few questions on that. Is how do you link the information systems? How do you ensure a single truth? Over to you, Ms. Ahmad. Thank you.
Thank you, Fabian. Now I'm trying to share the slide.
I get the same sign all the time. Technology doesn't help when we need it. We're seeing it now. Perfect. Excellent.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Fabian, and the participants. Very good morning from Malaysia to everyone. I'm Noryati from Accrual Accounting Implementation Team of Accountant General's Department of Malaysia. First of all, I would like to thank PEMNA as the organizer of this event for the opportunity given to Accountant General's Department of Malaysia to share some experiences and views in this program regarding asset valuation and reporting. My presentation will be more on accounting perspective and try to relate to asset management, and we'll cover about the background of asset in Malaysian government context, and followed by fixed asset life cycle, then asset management or valuation on how we do it, a little bit of our journey from cash to accrual accounting basis, which relates to asset migration activity into our accounting system. Then we look into the asset management and our integrated government financial management accounting system, which known as IGF-MAS, and lastly about property, plant and equipment classification and useful life. As we all know, the asset is resources controlled by an entity as a result of past events, and from which future economic benefits or service potential are expected to flow to the entity. as you are aware that the objective of the government is not for profit orientation, it is more on the services to public. Then this is the core differences when we talk about the commercial and public sector entities assets. In Malaysian government, we adopt Malaysian public sector accounting standards in preparing our financial statement, including the standard for assets, which primarily drawn from International Public Sector Accounting Standard, which is issued by IPSAS Board, International Public Sector Accounting Standard Board. This standard will prescribe the accounting treatment for public sector asset, which cover the recognition, measurement, and disclosures. Includes is the depreciation charges and impairment losses to be recognized in relation to them. For asset purposes, we adopt MPSAS 17 for property, plant, and equipment, which includes infrastructure and heritage assets. The MPSAS 13 for lease asset, MPSAS 16 for investment property, and MPSAS 31 for intangible asset, and MPSAS 32 for concession asset, and inventory for inventory is we adopt the MPSAS 12. Besides the standards I mentioned, of course, we also need to look into other standards as well when we do the accounting works. The adoption and compliance of this MPSAS on preparing our financial statement is to ensure that our financial statement will give true and fair view during the accounting period, and also to table it to our parliament. And in this presentation, I will focus on MPSAS 17, property, plant, and equipment, as a basic to recognize for asset and its measurement. Under this standard, it tells us what is PPE. PPE is a tangible item held for use in the production, supply of goods and services for rental or administrative purposes, and expected to be used during more than one reporting period. The keyword is during more than one reporting period. If it is less, then we didn't put it as our asset registry. So another thing is about the recognition criteria. The asset should have the future economic benefits or service potential associated with them. The item will flow to the entities, and the cost or fair value of the item can be measured reliably. On top of that, our government is having a policy about the asset, whereby we have a threshold where the asset is less than 2,000 per item. We will expense it off, and we call it as a low value asset, but it shall be registered or recording to our registry asset and for the controlling purposes. For the asset management side, we adopt the circular of asset management for movable asset and immovable asset. So our MOF and also the respective department, the technical department, is issuing the circulars that have to be followed by other departments as well. Now we go to another slide which shows about fixed asset life cycle and the relationship between the accounting for asset and its management. Why? Because these two perspectives is interrelated. On the top is about the scope of accounting for assets, which are about recognizing and how to measure, initial measurement and its subsequent measurement, and how we do if the asset not used anymore. We call it as a due recognition. And in managing the asset, the below one is about the asset management. In managing the asset, it involves activities from purchasing the asset up to the retirement or disposal of asset. All the activities will affect the asset accounting treatment and will be accounted accordingly when preparing our financial statement. Of course, besides this activity, they also have their own technical activities and reports For example, premises management report, where they look after the occupancy of the building, how many square foot they have to maintain, and make a planning for the maintenance and acquire a new asset and so forth. So at the asset management, for the purpose of putting the movement or the changes in asset management value to the accounting system, we use that particular MPSAS standard. So the data should be flowed manually or integratedly to the accounting system. Okay, for initial measurement, we should consider about the purchase cost. What value that we have to bring into our accounting system is about the purchase cost, and also the cost element that attributable to that particular item. So we have to think about the purchase cost and plus the import duty, plus handling, and also the discount that we get from the supplier. And cost element, which any cost involved in bringing the asset to its current location and condition for use or for sale. For example, the transportation cost, cost of site preparation, installation and assembly costs, and cost of testing, just name a few. And of course, we have to think about the dismantling and removal or restoration cost, which is actually is an initial estimation of the cost of stripping it and moving it elsewhere and restoring the site where it is located. In Malaysian context, we will include the dismantling, removal or restoration costs if we have knowledge about that particular things, including if we have the documentation about it, which is we can find it under the contract with the vendor, or the estimation from the supplier, or the estimation from technical department, if any. But at this moment of time, we are not doing it unless it is stated clearly in the contracts. So as we all know, under the cash basis, before we are doing the cash basis, we did not account for assets and liabilities. We actually have asset management system, which is standalone, in which they manage different types of asset, but that particular systems cannot fulfill the accrual requirement. We also noticed that there were a lot of data of asset not up to date, and some were kept manually, and there was scenario they were not kept anywhere. So it was a tough job to trace the existence of the asset and to value the assets accordingly. Currently, beside of applying the MPSAS for asset standard, such as MPSAS 17, which is for property, plant and equipment, we also adopt MPSAS 33, meant for transitional period provision in terms of recognition and measurement of asset to bring in the asset for opening balance of asset in our financial statement. So what value that we have to take into our financial statement after we have recognized that assets is ours? It depends on how we acquire it. Is it from exchange or non-exchange transaction? If it is from exchange transaction, the asset should be recognized and measured at cost or deemed cost. So we have talked about the cost, purchasing cost and whatever cost before, but what is the deemed cost? Deemed cost is an amount used as a surrogate for acquisition cost or depreciated cost at a given date. In Malaysian context, we use a fair value as deemed cost, which apply at the date of adoption where historical cost is not available. This deemed cost only apply for the transitional policy as per MPSAS 33 transitional provision and not for the new assets. Next, if an asset is acquired from a non-exchange transaction, its cost is determined at fair value at the acquisition date, and if the asset is derived from an exchange of non-monetary assets or an asset, or a combination of both, then the assets shall be measured at fair value. So who will determine the fair value of the assets? We have a Valuation and Property Services Department of Malaysia, which doing the job, and still they are doing it because there's a lot of asset to be valued, and there's a lot of asset to be bring into our accounting system. They value the asset when there are no historical trace. Actually, it is a challenging job by both of us, both of the department, accountant department, and also the valuer department, especially when we think about manpower. As for information, more than 50,000 items, mainly from building and land, are being valued by the valuer department. Also the infrastructure as well. So that in some instances, we ask the public work department to estimate the value of their asset where they cannot find the historical cost. For example, our federal road and federal highway, some of our road has been built by way before most of us was born, and some road are from before our independence day. And there were lots of upgrades have been carried out until now, and since no documentation is available in terms of historical cost, the technical department itself estimate the value through the depreciated replacement cost method. And this value is a deemed cost to the asset, and that value that we need to bring it into the accounting system. And of course, there is a governance there in bringing in the values into the system. And for the depreciation costs, we are not doing the straight line. It is based on the condition-based method, CBM, and intervention with that they have to make a journal every year to put the depreciation costs in our accounting system. Whereas in other assets, we are doing the depreciation with straight line basis automatically from our system. For subsequent measurement, after we have recognized and account for it, so what is the value? Because we think about the asset is, might be there is a wear and tear and so forth. So what is the subsequent measurement that we adopt? We adopt the cost model instead of revaluation model, whereby the costs are minus the accumulated depreciation and accumulated impairment loss, that we could derive the net book value or the carrying amount of that asset. And most of the item or most of the asset, we are doing the straight line basis, except for certain items, just like the federal road or highways. And then we are not adopting the revaluation model just yet, because if you adopt this, then we have to have an assessment activity yearly, whether to indicate whether there is a indicator that the value of the asset either go up or down, and if there is any, then we will account it accordingly. We not talk about one item, we talk about thousands of items. So we are spared not doing the revaluation model, but yeah, but maybe when we have already put all the statistics into the accounting system, or we account all the items into accounting information system, maybe one day, but not now. We do the revaluation model based on the classification of assets. And now we have to, I will tell you about the subsequent costs, how we go about it. After we have accounted and recognized and we choose the cost models, then if there is a cost pertaining to that asset, cost incurred pertaining to that asset because of repair and maintenance in which to restore and sustain future economic benefits, then we have to expense off. But if it increase the value of economic benefits and service potential, or replace the important components of that particular asset, or it can prolong the useful life of that asset, then we need to capitalize it. And actually, in terms of what to capitalize, just like Dr. Henning said that, engineering have their own perspective and accounting have their own perspective. So we have to make sure that our terminology is the same. We have a dictionary to make it online and in terms of understanding. So yeah, we have recently we have come up with some terminology to be used as to indicate whether the cost incurred is expense of or to be capitalized. The last cycle of the fixed asset life cycle is about the derecognition, whereby in layman term we call it as a drop from asset registry. We derecognize the asset if there is disposal on it, and or there is no future economic benefits or service potential are expected inflow into the entities, and it will create the gains or losses of the disposal. The gain or losses is the difference between net disposal, if any, and the carrying amount of that particular assets, and we accounted in surplus or deficit. So I would like to share about the change management activities that we have done in accordance to asset management and accounting for assets. We have to make a stakeholder engagement. We have to know who is our stakeholder, especially the holder of the assets, and also public at large, and also the parliament. And then from there, we are updating our asset management circulars. This is done by our MOF and also our public works. And we also have to make some changes of the accounting procedures, and especially the terminology. And updating for asset management circulars is due to the data that we have to have from them in terms of accounting for the purpose of accounting procedures. Because accounting is accounting, it just catch the value of the assets. So yeah, they are doing it. And then besides, we have a training and knowledge sharing, and the important ones is the communication.
So, Mr. Matt, we'll need to wrap up. You can kindly finalize in 1 minute, and then you can provide more information and responses in the chat. There are already quite a few questions to you. Thank you.
Okay, so I will jump into the asset management system and IGF-MAS. Our integrated government financial and management accounting system have been developed and then been go live in 2018. It consists of 14 accounting modules, which is material management, account payable, account receivable, and the important ones, asset accounting. And this IGF-MAS also have the ability to produce financial reporting, management reporting, analytic dashboard, and budgeting report through the BW reporting and analytics. And we also integrated with external system, procurement system, and other system. And also for the asset management system, we are not migrating it because they are standalone. Even there is no one system that consolidate all the system there, movable asset, immovable asset, asset under construction, and then system. So they are standalone and not integrated or not communicated with each other. But they do produce the asset management report for that particular assets. So actually how, since the government transactions are extensive and so many parties are involved, the integration with external system was crucial as to ensure that the service delivery to the public is intact. Just naming a few, the external system with integrate with IGMS procurement system, banks, receipting system by ministry and agencies, bulk payment to utilities providers, and so forth. In Malaysian context, the concept of total asset management is applied and its emphasis on systematic and holistic management of government asset in order to achieve optimal asset benefits. And one of the objectives is to provide complete information for the purpose of development planning and asset use, control and monitoring of office space, government buildings, energy, resources, cost, and disposal. Under the asset management system, we have 5 main asset management system as per slide. We notice that it will be more meaningful if they have recent financial data asset and a single asset system to assist them to achieve the objective, which they can have it from IGFMAS. The Secretariat of Asset Management is aware of the importance of integration with IGFMAS as well. And actually, the IGFMAS have developed integration platform, but it depends on the readiness of the asset management system to integrate with IGFMAS. And now, the next question is how we capture asset value in IGFMAS. It all started when we procured the items through procurement system. We call it SEP or under material management module. The procurement data will go to IGFMAS to make payment process, which involve good receive notes, and it will go to account payable module, and the ID asset will be created automatically. And at the same time, the asset registrar is updated and the accounting records are taking place as well. We call it as asset recognition has been made. The asset accounting module have a depreciation monthly process and is able to produce the current carrying amount or net book value of the assets. For disposal and impairment of assets, since the system is not integrated yet, personnel have to update both in asset accounting module and their asset management system. If the disposal is through selling, then it will trigger the account receivable in IGFMAS that will account the proceed of disposal and then post it to asset accounting module to calculate the gain or losses from disposal and de-recognize the asset from asset registry. The IGFMAS is IGFMAS will produce a monthly and yearly financial statement and disclose all the assets according to the classification of assets and the movement where there is addition or disposal of the aspect of the year. The asset accounting module will also be able to produce asset register up to the responsibility center. The IGFMAS actually is the sole asset registrar for all types of government assets, since existing asset management system is all standalone and no single system consolidate all the asset information except they have it in IGFMAS. The development of IGFMAS actually aware of this asset management system that we have, and then develop our own asset accounting, whereby to capture all of the assets in government in terms of financial asset. If the integration taken place, the IGFMAS will integrate the financial data to respective asset management system and updated their asset management system of new asset or new financial information of the asset into their system, so they can do the monitoring, asset locations, and other asset activities and reporting. For that, below is the classification of assets and its useful life that we use in our asset modules and we share to our asset management system as well. So we have categorized the land according to accounting classification. And if you look at the useful life, since we have a limitation of the IGFMAS, because we are not talking about thousands of items, we talk about millions of items. At this moment of time, we have account about 1.2 million movable assets and about 100,000 60,000 or 70,000 fixed asset or the land and building and also infrastructure. And the figure is keep coming, and the migration of data is still in the progress. So we use the useful life in terms of ranging it, and then the personnel have to key in what actually their useful life. It is a technical matters, leave it to them, and the accounting have to key in the useful life, but according to this range. So and we have shared it with our management system as well. So with that, thank you. Over to you, Fabian.
Well, thank you very much for this very rich presentation. And as you can see in the chat already, a lot of questions, great interest in the Malaysian experience, and a lot of questions, because indeed you covered a lot of ground, both in terms of the accounting, the valuation, but also the information systems, how they connect, the useful life, the thresholds. So that's great. So maybe if I can ask you, Ms. Ahmad, to start answering the questions in the chat, while we move to Cambodia to hear from their country update, and then followed by a quick country update from Timor-Leste. So for the country updates, please try to keep it to 5 minutes so that we have time for discussion. If we need some extra time, understand from the secretariat that we can have additional time. So it's at least it's good that we have a buffer there. So the time of the event has been re-evaluated in the process. But without further ado, so let me move then to Mr. Theuns Henning. He's senior staff at the Cambodian General Department of the National Treasury, and will give us a quick update of the asset management and valuation reform in Cambodia. Thank you. Over to you. And Ms. Ahmad, if you see, do you see the questions in the chat? Yeah, lots of interest on your experience.
Hi, Edwin. Do you probably hear?
We don't see the screen yet. We see that you're trying to share, but maybe loading.
Yeah, I'm trying to share my screen. But at this point of time, you haven't seen my screen yet, right?
No, not
or
yet.
Is it
not
possible
yet.
you can share it for me, because just a few slide on. Right.
Okay, let's Rufio, would you be able to share from your end?
Yes, we can put up a slide from our end.
Great.
Share.
If you could
So
stop
let's do
sharing.
that then,
So then I stop
Mr.
sharing,
Henning?
then you start. Right.
Yes,
Yeah,
we'll
exactly.
put it up from our end.
Thank you. Perfect, we can see it. So you can go ahead, Mr. Henning.
So good morning, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm Sokna, staff of the General Department of National Treasury of the Ministry of Economy and Finance. So it's my great pleasure to join this important event and to share with all of you about our country update, especially on the asset management. So just kindly move to the next slide. So basically, we are currently at case basis accounting since 2019, and as of now, the Ministry of Economy and Finance has issued a practice to adopt the case basis Cambodian public sector accounting standard. So within that practice or edict, the government required to prepare the financial statement in compliance with that standard. And the General Department of National Treasury has issued the case basis financial statement for 2019, and as lately we have also issued for 2020 as well. And for the state of asset management right now, we are We have a general department of state property and non-tax revenue. They are in charge of the state asset register, and at the meantime, we have only 4 classification only. We have land and building, vehicle, machinery, and furniture and fitting. As you see in our register here, most of the structure asset or the infrastructure asset has yet come into our book yet. So our recent effort is we have launched an offline state asset management information system, and we call it SAMIS in 2021. That system is an offline system only because we just have an application and give the template for the line ministry to upload their register in, to key in and send us the data for the state asset management here, and then they would upload it later on. And prior to that, prior to 2021, we operate a manual and paper-based state asset register, and to come to aggregation or the consolidation of the data would be a nightmare for us. And recently, the General Department of National Treasury has made an initiative, and we create an internal working team. We are responsible for drafting the accounting policy for asset accounting and asset reporting. So let's move to the next slide. The secretary, can you move to the next slide actually? Yeah, as I shared to you earlier on our recent outcome, and we have projection by 2031 on asset management. So we are currently in the case basis accounting, and we are doing our task to move to accrual accounting by 2031. So by then, we need a complete asset register and proper valuation, I mean the reliable figure, prior to integrate that balance into the financial management system. So by doing so, and we also face certain challenge here, but I will not list down all. I'm mainly on the asset register. As mentioned earlier, we have only 4 classes, and the other main asset has yet been in our book or in our register yet. So our asset register is not complete. And as I try to ask the many speaker on the valuation, and especially the valuation method for the infrastructure asset or the asset that has been not in our book, then we are also facing some sort of limit methodology on asset valuation. Either we bring the prior asset into our book by a fair value measurement or a dim cost, and which one is the acceptable level, acceptable figure. Because if we bring in some sort of like not reliable, we would face a lot of adjustment and restart the balance for the next subsequent reporting period. And at the meantime, we're also facing human, financial, and technology resource. As of now, we have a specialized asset system yet. As I mentioned earlier on the SAMI system, but it's only on the inventory system only. It's not a specialized asset management yet. And in our FMIS system, we have yet have a module to assist asset accounting in a proper way. And that's what I would like to share about our country update. And many thanks for your attention and for your time. Thank you. That's the end. Over to you, Fabian. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Henning, for this very efficient presentation. Indeed, it's a long journey, as we have heard throughout. And it's good to start with a few asset classes. And indeed, if the initial priority, which often is for the Ministry of Finance and the Commission audit, is transparency and accountability compliance, then these assets are indeed the right asset classes to start with, because no one will take a bridge or road, right? But if your objective then moves towards optimization of the value, the utilization of the assets, or climate resilience, then it's important to also include infrastructure assets. It's great. You ask a very good question also in terms of the valuation, the book entry. Do we take the book entry for all the assets? We had a similar question also from Vietnam, and I think that everyone, all accountants are struggling with the same issue, right? Is what do we take as a cutoff date? How do we value really old assets? How do we avoid major adjustments, which then raises questions with our Court of Audit and the public? So that would be interesting also to hear from Korea and Malaysia, how they've addressed that, either in the Q&A or in the chat. But before that, let me maybe hand over first to Mr. Aguido da Silva, who is advisor to the Treasury at the General Treasury of Timor-Leste, to share his experience in terms of asset management. Thank you. Over to you.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon already from Timor-Leste. I actually don't have any slide to share with me from this computer, but if Secretary can share the slide that I have sent to the Secretary, would be appreciated.
Sure, we do have your slides. Just give us a sec. Yeah.
So my name is Aguido da Silva. My role is as Treasury Advisor under the Directorate General of Treasury, Minister of Finance, Timor-Leste. This presentation will be very short because in relation to fixed asset management and registration, we are only at the initial stage, but hopefully this should be sufficient to update you where we are at the moment in terms of fixed asset management, registration, and valuation in accordance with the theme of CoP webinar this time. And therefore, this update will focus on two main points only. First will be regarding the current process that we have at the moment at the Ministry of Finance Timor-Leste, and our future plan in relation to asset management, registration, and valuation. So with that, I'm going to straight away jump into the main purpose, which is to provide some updates on where we are at the moment and what is our future plan. So in relation to current process, in relation to asset registration, we do have asset registration in place at the moment, but this is only in relation to non-fixed asset, which is mainly vehicles and office equipment, which is managed by a separate general under the responsibility of Directorate General of State Assets. But reporting responsibility is under the Directorate General of Treasury, because in accordance with our PFM law, Treasury has the responsibility to prepare financial statement, which consists of both current and non-current assets to the National Parliament and as well as to the Court of Audit. And both the Directorate General of Assets and Treasury are under the Ministry of Finance. And due to the Timor-Leste government is currently adopting case-based accounting. So the reporting that we are preparing to the National Parliament and Court of Audit is mainly based on cash transaction or assets that is relation to current asset. Next slide, if it's possible. However, at the moment, we do have asset model exist in our financial management information system. But as I mentioned earlier, it's only used to register non-fixed asset like vehicles and office equipment. However, recently, because of the recommendation by the Court of Audit, we have included in our financial statement information regarding non-fixed asset, but as a list and included as notes to account without any financial value or depreciation value, but only list. But this year, Treasury Timor-Leste has initiated a process to ensure we have systematic asset registration of internal fixed assets and valuation, including infrastructure assets. Next slide, please. The reason why we are doing this is actually to support government's plan to transition from current case-based accounting to accrual-based accounting. So this year we have put prioritization on ensuring that fixed asset management and registration, including infrastructure assets, are in place to support this plan, which is to transition from case-based accounting to accrual-based accounting. And to achieve that objectives, we have held discussion with key line ministers like Minister of Public Works and Minister of Justice, ensure that fixed asset registration, including infrastructure assets and land and public properties, are initiated. The plan is as early as 2022. The reason the discussion is held or involved this two key line ministers is because, in accordance with our law, Minister of Public Works is actually controlling all infrastructure assets like roads, bridges, ports, airports, and other infrastructure assets, while Minister of Justice is controlling land and public buildings. At the same time, this year, we also have requested our Financial Management Information System, or GRP, free balance, to enhance our existing asset model, which is only used to register non-fixed assets, to also accommodate fixed asset registration, including infrastructure assets, road, bridges, land, and public properties. Next slide. It is expected that once the enhanced version of existing financial management in existing asset model in financial management information system is finalized, can also be utilized for fixed asset registration. We are not quite sure how it will turn out, but since because this is our we are at the initial stage, so this is actually our plan to actually combine in one module asset registration that consists of both non-fixed and fixed asset registration. With that registration complete, we are expecting that by 2023, we can initiate asset valuation for all fixed assets of the government by as early as 2023. That's based on the plan that we are having at the moment. We are also hope that this can be fully disclosed, value of the asset in the financial statement from 2024. And hopefully this will allow us to actually gradually transition from current case-based accounting that we are having to accrual-based accounting in the future. But because of this is only, we are only at the initial stage in terms of asset, fixed asset management, registration and valuation. We are also looking forward to enrich our experience from other member countries who already have systematic asset management, registration and valuation, and already moved to accrual-based accounting like Malaysia. And hopefully in the following PEMNA conferences, we can learn from this the other PEMNA members. So that shall conclude our update from Timor-Leste, and I hand it back to the moderator. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks a lot, Mr. Da Silva. And indeed, it's really good to have a medium-term plan. It's a long-term reform. And glad that you find today's session useful in terms of exchanging of information. There's been quite a lot of questions in the chat already, notably to Malaysia, and Ms. Ahmad has started addressing them. I think there will be much more questions. So we now have the opportunity to ask questions, comments. We have a Q&A. We have a bit of extra time if needed. And so it would be good to hear from you, and also maybe to hear from Indonesia. We haven't heard from Indonesia this time, and I think that's a lot of great efforts are also made in this respect. So it would be great. I don't want to put you on the spot, but it would be great to hear from you as well. We cannot have a COP without hearing from Indonesia, can we? So over to you. Who has a question? Or else we can go in more details on the questions in the chat. So if I don't see any hand raised, maybe I'll go to the chat. And I see that there are quite a few questions in terms of how to link the information system, how to ensure this single truth of information, and making sure that this information is updated, because it's a huge effort to value and capture all these assets. You know, as we heard from Ms. Ahmad, more than 70,000 fixed assets, 1.2 million movable assets. And then keeping this information comprehensive, because you cannot produce financial statements if you don't have comprehensive information. I think that's what many treasuries are struggling with now. So that's how to link this information, and there are different sources of information. There's obviously the asset management system, such as NAS or others, or the Malaysian, which we have seen, the Korean, which we have seen. But there's also useful information coming out of the procurement systems, I guess, in terms of what assets are being acquired at what date, at what value. And also information coming out of the public investment management systems in terms of constructions, infrastructure projects, and so forth. So trying to see how all this linked together. Obviously, integration is a tall order. Usually it's more interoperability, data exchanges, which also requires a very clear common definition. And I think that's what I also take away from the Malaysian experience, is that they've invested quite a lot in terminology and definition, so that everyone knows is talking about the same thing before entering the data, right? And this way data can talk. But so who wants to come in on that?
Fabian? Yeah, actually, how we integrate, actually there is no integration with asset management, existing asset management and IGF MAS. But the thing is, when we do the, we call it as, when we move to cash to accruals, that we need to bring in the assets, and we are using the asset management, existing asset management, to actually identify our assets. And of course, there's a lot of, you know, I call it a setback, because there's a lot of information which is not there, and not fulfill the requirement of assets. So we are engaging the assets holder, and then we are discuss of what we want, because we want to have that, especially for the asset which is not through the procurement process in IGF MAS. So yes, actually the collection of data from the asset management, and also manually digging the information where the data is not kept. We started in 2014 and is still in the progress. I would say that 97% or 95% of the fixed assets have been accounted into the system. And in terms of value, under the land and building and infrastructure, they are very significant value compared to the movable assets. But the movable asset have big numbers compared to this one. So we have presented to our asset management committee and the ministries, and actually they are looking at it, and they try. They are updating the circular of the assets, and to cater for the accrual requirement, and also they plan to what to do with that, with the financial data to their asset management. I think that's the main point here. So they can, use the data and the non-financial data from them to plan for the assets management. That's the main point. That's how they are willing to cooperate with us. Yes, at this moment of time. Yeah, thank you.
No, thanks a lot. So I think a related, and indeed, I think there was also a question we saw in terms of movable assets, fixed assets. Should they have the same treatment, because the asset management doesn't have necessarily the same purposes, right? It's so for movable assets, it's really more about compliance. Fixed assets, it's really more the value, the economy. And maybe also increasingly now the disaster risk. So that's maybe another question I would have to you and other speakers is, are you taking into account the increased climate risks and losses of assets? And are you asking actually, so how are you approaching that? And are you asking agencies to cover that? And a related question is in terms of the scope, to what extent do you also include state-owned enterprises or assets held by state-owned enterprises, because many of the infrastructure assets may not be held by ministries directly, but by state-owned enterprises, utilities, and so forth. So, how are they also covered? Thank you.
Fabian, is it for me?
For you, but also for other members, if they want to come in, it would be good to hear also from Indonesia's experience. I know that the speaker from Korea has left. Would also be good to hear from the Philippine experience, which is really covering the large infrastructure fixed assets and has a strong emphasis on climate risk and resilience. I think this was one of the drivers, and that's why there's the geolocalization. So it's really to all the speakers. Thank you.
Okay, for the Malaysian perspective, we are not account for the climate change, and actually we are studying it, like the emission trading or something like that. But at this moment of time, we are not adopting any of the, the risks and whatever to our asset management. But in the technical side, yes, they do have, but only for, I think it's more on the wear and tear and some other things. That's all from Malaysia. Yeah. Okay.
Oh, great. Thank you very much. So maybe we can organize a follow-up session on that. There will also be more discussion on valuation and accrual accounting in the future. So I think we have, that's maybe something, if there's interest, we can go more in depth into these issues. But so let me see if there are any further questions or comments coming in. As I saw that there's one question from Vietnam for Korea. So in terms of who deals with the assets if it's not assigned to a specific unit. So are there actually, that's maybe the first question, are there any any assets which are not assigned? And if so, how is that being treated from a accounting and financial reporting perspective? So I know the speaker of Korea has left, but I don't know if the colleagues have this information in terms of who is responsible for these assets, and are all public assets actually assigned to someone, as a department, a local government, or your assets management company?
There is no asset that is not assigned to anyone. The local governments are all of them are dealing with their assets, and there's no asset is not cared by no one.
로컬 거버먼트가 어사인될 수도 있고, 네, 중앙부처도 관리하는 자산이 있고 이런 것 같아요.
There are assets that are managed by local governments as well as the central government, but there's no asset that is not cared.
Thank you. And so, including for land, I understand, no? Land, all public land is assigned to some entity.
모든 퍼블릭 공공 부지, 토지가 For answering that question, we will ask the person who presented before.
So, you know, just if there's public land that is not assigned to an entity, or is public land assigned, every public land is assigned to one entity, either a local government or a national government or a specialized corporation.
We understand that every land is assigned to any entity, but we are not sure if we are correct.
No, absolutely, thank you. And I think that's maybe a specificity in some countries where land is public by default, and it's not necessarily fully titled and assigned. But I understand also it's not the case in Korea, because that makes it then much more difficult from an accounting and valuation perspective. And so we have sympathy with the VST in that respect. Good. So I think if there are no other questions, oh, there's a hand up. Yeah, Mr. Heng, please go ahead.
Good morning again, and I would like to ask two Malaysian speakers, mainly on the useful life. I saw her last screen. She did share about the different type classification of asset, and also saw the useful life of that. Now my question is on the basis for providing the range of useful life. Say the land, it's not a building, it's some sort of minimum range, and the longest range, or the vehicle is different range. I mean, and I just want to know her basis and how to come up and the rationale behind providing the range of useful life of that asset. Did you get what I mean? I'm sorry. Okay, I just have that question only.
Basically, before we determine the useful life of that assets, we are doing the survey through our ministries, especially the technical sites, and also we studied from other countries as well. So we conclude, because you say why we do the range, because I think at that point of time we are study in UK, or I can't remember, UK or Canada, that they have also a range kind of system. So the point is, actually we have a lot of items, and we cannot, in our system, we cannot dedicated one, one useful life for one kind of assets, because as we found out that even car, the useful life of the car is different between the ministries, car or the vehicles. Let's say the ambulance may be different from the passengers van. So we survey that, and then we conclude, and then there is a governance. We have to propose to the governance saying that yes, it is the useful life that we have surveyed and been updating. Also, we have a response for the technical, and along the implementation, they also come up, if they have some issues on the useful life of asset, they come with us, and we change the policy. But of course, since we are doing that useful life policy since 2014, so maybe it's time, maybe we have to look back our policy, and because the technology is also, more updating technology in terms of maintaining the asset and so forth. So yeah, the basis is we are doing the studies, and also we take a risk. We ask the technical people to assist us in determine the useful life.
Great, thank you very much indeed. So there's no one size fits all. It's really important to see case by case, agency by agency. Is there any other question or comments from the members? If not, let me thank the speakers for this very rich session. It was really great to see both the norms and international practices, and then the actual experience on the ground, and from a diverse set of countries. And so we all see how it is a medium-term journey. The objectives are evolving over time, really, from transparency and compliance to also optimization of asset values, revenue generation. That's maybe a further discussion we could have on how to really extract more revenues from idle assets as the use and demand for some assets changes. But increasingly now also in terms of climate risk screening, resilience, and insurance, which also has important financial consequences, both on the budget, but also on the balance sheet. Indeed, we cannot cover all that ground in one session. It was already a very rich session. So if there's no further comment, let me hand over to Dr. Hyung-So Heo, the head of the PEMNA Secretariat, and thanking her for having made this event possible, so that she can also give her closing remarks. Thank you. Over to you, Dr. Heo.
Thank you, Fabian. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to thank everyone for participating in the PEMNA TICAP webinar. It's been almost 3 hours. I believe today's webinar was very successful, thanks to your fruitful, constructive, and open exchanges. Today's theme, fixed asset management, valuation, and registries, is a rather new and emerging topic in PFM area, but also has significant impact on public finance. Fixed asset management has been challenging in many aspects, including valuation, accrual-based accounting, and FIMIS. And I hope the knowledge exchange and discussions through our PEMNA TICAP webinar could be insightful to your everyday work situations. As we wrap up our meeting, I would like to express a few words of gratitude to those who made this meeting possible. First, I would like to thank Mr. Fabian Siderer, PEMNA TICAP facilitator, for all his efforts on organizing and facilitating this meeting. Our special thanks go to Mr. Henning for excellent presentation, which made the overview session very informative and helpful. I would like to thank all the presenters from Korea, Philippines, and Malaysia for sharing your experiences in fixed asset management. And we are very grateful to Cambodia and Timor-Leste for bringing your recent update and plans to the table. Let me conclude by thanking all of you once again for your time and valuable insights. I look forward to welcoming you again at the next year's PEMNA meeting. Thank you very much. Stay healthy and safe.